Betrayal is not always found in the hands of enemies. Sometimes it is wrapped in the embrace of those we once called family, in the words of those we trusted, in the actions of those to whom we gave our hearts without hesitation. There is a unique pain in being wounded by the very ones we believed would stand beside us through life's storms. It is a sorrow that seeps into the soul not just for the hurt itself, but for the shattering of the illusion that love always protects, always nurtures, always remains steadfast. What do you do when the hand that once wiped your tears becomes the hand that causes them? Where do you go when the home you found solace in becomes the source of your deepest wounds? The world will tell you to harden your heart, to return pain with pain, to match betrayal with bitterness. But that is not the path God has set before you. There is something sacred in suffering, something that only those who have walked through the fire of heartbreak can understand. Every wound you carry, every silent cry in the darkness of night, every moment when you felt unseen and unloved, God has counted them all. Not one tear has fallen from your eyes without His knowing. And though the weight of hurt may feel unbearable, there is a divine promise written in eternity. God will heal you. Have you ever noticed how God often leads His chosen ones through seasons of deep pain before elevating them? Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, thrown into a pit, and sold into slavery by the very ones who should have protected him. David, the man after God's own heart, was hunted like an enemy by the very king he had served faithfully. Even Christ Himself was denied, abandoned, and crucified by the ones He came to save. Yet in every story, the suffering was not the end, it was the beginning of something greater. And so, the question remains, what if your pain is not a punishment, but a preparation? What if the betrayal you have endured is not the final chapter, but the turning point of a grander design? God does not waste suffering. He does not permit wounds without the promise of healing. But His healing is not always what we expect. Perhaps you are waiting for an apology that will never come, a restoration that may not happen in the way you imagine. But God's healing does not require the permission of those who hurt you. It is not dependent on their regret or their remorse. When God steps in, He does not merely mend what was broken, He creates something new. He removes the sting of betrayal, silences the voice of rejection, and places within you a strength that even those who hurt you cannot understand. Now think about this: if those who wounded you had not done so, would you have drawn closer to God the way you have now? Would you have sought His presence, His comfort, His guidance with the same urgency? Sometimes pain is the only language that awakens the soul to its greatest calling. It strips away illusions, removes the distractions of false love, and leads us into the arms of the only one who will never betray us. If you have been betrayed, abandoned, or broken by those you love, do not let it turn your heart to stone. The world will tell you to build walls, to trust no one, to armor yourself in bitterness, so that you may never be hurt again. But that is not healing. That is imprisonment. The true victory is not in becoming cold and unreachable, it is in allowing God to restore you in such a way that you love again, trust again, and live again, not in fear, but in faith. Do not mistake God's silence for absence. The wounds that still ache in the quiet moments, the questions that remain unanswered, the memories that resurface when you least expect them, God is working through them all. Healing is not always immediate, but it is always certain for those who place their pain in God's hands. And when He restores, He does not simply return what was lost, He replaces it with something far greater. So, how does God heal the wounds inflicted by those we love? What signs does He send to guide us through this pain? Let's explore 7 divine truths that will help you understand how God transforms your suffering into strength. There is a pain unlike any other, a pain that cuts deeper than 1,000 swords, that lingers longer than the harshest winter. It is the pain of being hurt by the very people you love the most, the ones you held close, the ones you trusted, the ones you thought would stand beside you through every storm. And yet, it is often from them that the deepest wounds come. What do you do when the hand that once wiped your tears becomes the very hand that causes them? When the voice that once whispered comfort now speaks only words of rejection and betrayal? The world offers its answers: harden your heart, seek revenge, trust no one ever again. But is that the answer your soul truly seeks? You see, there is something sacred in suffering, something unseen, something eternal. The world may look at your pain and call it a tragedy, but God sees it as a transformation. The wound you carry, the betrayal you suffered, the silent nights when your heart ached in solitude, none of it was overlooked by heaven. Every tear you have shed has been counted, and every prayer whispered in desperation has been heard. It is easy to trust God in seasons of joy, when love is abundant and companionship is sure. But what happens when love turns to rejection? When kindness is met with cruelty? When your loyalty is answered with deceit? It is in these moments that your faith is tested, not in the brightness of the morning, but in the silence of the midnight hour, when the weight of sorrow presses upon your chest. But let me ask you, what if the pain you are enduring is not a sign of God's absence, but His presence? What if the betrayal was not meant to destroy you, but to reveal something far greater? Think of Joseph the dreamer. He was not betrayed by strangers, not plotted against by outsiders, but by his own brothers, the very people who should have protected him. They threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and left him to a fate they thought would end in destruction. And yet they did not know that God was writing a story far greater than their hatred. What they meant for harm, God used for good. Joseph's suffering was not in vain, it was the very thing that positioned him for his destiny. And then there was David. He served faithfully, fought battles for a king he was loyal to, and yet the very king he honored sought his life. Betrayed, hunted, forced to flee like a criminal. Did God abandon him? No. God was preparing him for the throne. The betrayal was not his end, it was his beginning. Even Christ himself, the embodiment of perfect love, was not spared from betrayal. The very ones who followed him, who saw his miracles, who sat at his feet, one of them sold him for silver, another denied him, and the rest abandoned him in his darkest hour. And yet, what appeared to be the greatest tragedy in human history became the greatest victory. Betrayal was not the end, it was the doorway to something greater. So, let me ask you again, what if the pain you are carrying is a sign not of God's punishment, but of His preparation? What if the very ones who hurt you are being used to push you into the arms of the one who will never leave you? Perhaps you have been waiting for an apology that will never come. Perhaps you have spent years trying to earn love that was always withheld. Maybe you have pleaded for understanding from those who will never truly see your worth. But what if God is trying to show you something? What if He is whispering to you, saying, "Stop seeking healing from the hands that wounded you. Come to me, and I will heal you in ways you never imagined." Because here is the truth: God's healing does not depend on the apology of those who hurt you. It does not require their remorse, their regret, or their willingness to make things right. When God steps in, He does not simply mend what was broken, He makes all things new. Look around you. The pain you have endured is not without purpose. It has shaped you, refined you, drawn you closer to the one who truly loves you. Perhaps, in the moments of betrayal, you have seen the true nature of people. Perhaps you have learned who truly stands with you and who was only meant to walk a short season of your life. If those who hurt you had not done so, would you have drawn closer to God the way you have now? Would you have sought His presence, His guidance, His healing? Sometimes pain is the only thing that forces us to surrender completely, to stop seeking fulfillment in people who were never meant to complete us. And so I ask you, will you let this pain make you bitter, or will you allow God to use it for something greater? Will you build walls so high that no one can reach you, or will you trust that God's plan is greater than the suffering you have endured? God is not absent in your pain. He is working through it. And when He restores, He does not simply return what was lost, He replaces it with something far greater. So, how does God heal the wounds inflicted by those we love? What signs does He send to guide us through this pain? Let's explore 7 divine truths that will help you understand how God transforms suffering into strength. It is one of the hardest truths to accept that sometimes the people we love the most are not meant to stay in our lives forever. We resist this reality, holding on to relationships that drain us, friendships that betray us, and family ties that cut deeper than any wound. We convince ourselves that if we love harder, if we forgive more, if we keep giving chances, things will change. But what if God is trying to remove someone from your life, and you are fighting against His will? Consider this: when a gardener prunes a tree, he does not do it to destroy the tree, but to make it stronger, to allow it to bear greater fruit. Some branches are diseased, others are weak, and some simply take up space without contributing to growth. The gardener does not hesitate to cut them away, because he knows that without this painful process, the tree will never reach its full potential. Could it be that God is pruning your life? Could it be that He is cutting away the very people who would hinder your purpose? When someone walks away from you, when a relationship ends despite your best efforts, when betrayal forces separation, do not see it as a loss, see it as divine intervention. God does not allow the wrong people to stay in your life when He is preparing you for something greater, but He will not force you to let go. He will allow the pain to teach you, to refine you, to open your eyes to the reality that some people were never meant to walk the entire journey with you. Think about the story of Abraham and Lot. Abraham was chosen by God to be the father of many nations, to carry a promise that would change the world. But he made the mistake of bringing Lot with him, someone God never instructed him to take along. And what happened? Strife, division, and conflict followed. It was only when Lot finally left that God revealed the full extent of His promise to Abraham. What if the delays, the struggles, the hartash in your life are because you are carrying people who were never meant to go where God is taking you? We often pray for God to bless us, to elevate us, to take us to new heights. But we fail to realize that every new level requires letting go of something or someone. Not everyone is equipped to go where you are going. Some people were only meant to be in your life for a season, to teach you a lesson, to serve a purpose that has now been fulfilled. And when their time is up, their departure is not a tragedy, it is a divine necessity. God is not removing people from your life to punish you. He is doing it to protect you. He sees the betrayals you do not yet know about. He hears the conversations spoken behind your back. He knows the secret intentions of hearts, the hidden motives, the unseen dangers. When He removes someone, trust that it is for your good, even when it hurts. But here's the challenge: will you trust God enough to let go? Or will you keep trying to hold on to people who are blocking your blessings? There is a harsh reality we must all face. People will fail you. No matter how much they love you, no matter how much they mean well, they are human. They are flawed, imperfect, and often incapable of giving you the kind of love and security that your soul truly longs for. And yet we continue to place our trust in them. We anchor our happiness in their approval, our identity in their affection, our worth in their acceptance. But what happens when they betray us? When they abandon us? When they hurt us in ways we never imagined? God allows the pain of betrayal to teach us a powerful lesson: rely on Him alone. For too long you may have placed your faith in people instead of God. You sought validation from others when God was the only one who could define your worth. You depended on human love to fill a void that only divine love could satisfy. And so, when people failed you, when they walked away, when they shattered your trust, it felt like your entire world collapsed. But was that not the problem all along? Your foundation was built on the shifting sands of human approval instead of the unshakable rock of God's love. Look back at your life. How many times have people let you down? How many times have you been disappointed by those you thought would always stand by your side? And yet, through it all, there has been one who has never left you, never abandoned you, never failed you, God. He was there in the moments when you thought you were alone. He was there when you cried yourself to sleep. He was there when the betrayal left you questioning everything. And He is here now, whispering to your soul, trust me. God is not asking you to stop loving people. He is asking you to stop depending on them for what only He can give. He is not telling you to isolate yourself, to become cold or distant. He is calling you to shift your trust, to anchor your faith in something eternal. Because when you rely on Him alone, you will never be shaken. You will never be at the mercy of human inconsistency. Your joy, your peace, your strength will no longer come from fragile, imperfect people, but from the one who is unchanging. And here is the beauty of this lesson: when you learn to rely on God alone, He will bring the right people into your life. The people who will love you the way He intended. The people who will honor you, respect you, and walk with you in truth. But you will no longer need them to complete you. Their presence will be a blessing, not a necessity. Because your fulfillment, your security, your identity will already be rooted in God. So, let me ask you, who have you been relying on? Whose love have you been chasing? Whose approval have you been desperate to receive? And if they walked away today, would you still stand, or would you crumble? God is calling you to something deeper. He is teaching you to depend on Him, to trust Him, to place your life in His hands completely. The pain you have endured was not without purpose. It was meant to turn your eyes back to the only one who will never fail you. Are you ready to trust Him? Forgiveness is one of the hardest things to do when the ones who hurt you are the ones you love the most. It feels unnatural. It feels unfair. How do you forgive someone who shattered your trust? How do you release the pain when their actions left scars that still ache? The world will tell you that you have every right to be bitter, that you should seek revenge, that they deserve to feel the same pain they caused you. But God calls you to something higher. He calls you to forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Forgiveness is not for the one who hurt you, it is for you. It is not about excusing what they did or pretending that the pain never happened. It is about refusing to let their actions control your heart any longer. When you hold on to anger, when you replay the betrayal over and over in your mind, when you allow bitterness to take root, you are keeping yourself in the very prison that God wants to free you from. But let's be honest, forgiveness is impossible without God. On your own, you do not have the strength to forgive. Your flesh wants justice, your heart demands an apology, and your mind reminds you of every reason they don't deserve to be forgiven. That is why true forgiveness is not something you achieve through willpower. It is something you receive through surrender. Think of Jesus on the cross, betrayed by one of His own disciples, abandoned by those who once followed Him, falsely accused, humiliated, and tortured beyond recognition. And yet, in His final moments, He did not cry out for revenge. He did not curse those who hurt Him. He did not demand that justice be served immediately. Instead, He whispered words that shook the heavens: "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." How is this possible? How could He forgive people who were so cruel, so ungrateful, so wicked? Because He understood something most of us forget: forgiveness is not based on whether the other person is worthy of it. It is based on whether you are willing to let God handle what they did. When you refuse to forgive, you are saying, "God, I do not trust you to deal with this. I must hold on to it myself." But when you forgive, you release them into God's hands, knowing that He is the one who will handle justice in His perfect way and His perfect time. Forgiveness does not mean you have to restore the relationship. It does not mean you have to trust them again. Some people are not meant to be in your life, and forgiving them does not require you to let them back in. Forgiveness simply means that you are choosing freedom over bitterness. You are choosing to let God heal you instead of letting pain define you. So if you are struggling to forgive, ask God to help you. Tell Him, "Lord, I do not have the strength to forgive, but I know that you do. Fill my heart with your love and help me release the pain into your hands. And when you do, you will begin to experience a peace that no betrayal can take away." When people hurt you, it is not just the pain of their actions that wounds you, it is the shock, the disbelief, the overwhelming question of how could they do this to me? We expect betrayal from enemies, but when it comes from those we trusted, those we called family, those we believed would always stand by us, the pain is almost unbearable. But what if the betrayal was not meant to destroy you? What if it was meant to reveal something that you needed to see? God allows people to show their true nature, not to break you, but to protect you. Sometimes we place people on pedestals they were never meant to stand on. We assume they are incapable of deceit, incapable of selfishness, incapable of turning against us. And in doing so, we make the mistake of trusting them more than we trust God. But God sees what we do not. He knows the hearts of men, their intentions, their hidden motives. He knows who is loyal and who is only pretending. And when someone's heart is not aligned with His will for your life, He will allow their true nature to be revealed, not to harm you, but to free you. Judas sat at the same table as Jesus. He walked with Him, talked with Him, witnessed miracles with Him, and yet his heart was never truly with Jesus. God could have stopped Judas from betraying Christ, but He allowed it because it was necessary for the greater plan. Sometimes you will not see the truth about people until they hurt you. It is in betrayal that you discover who truly loves you and who only loves what you can give them. It is in rejection that you learn who was truly meant to walk with you and who was only passing through for a season. And here is the painful truth: you may never have let them go if they had not hurt you. Had Judas never betrayed Jesus, he might have remained among the disciples, but his heart would have always been divided. Had certain people never wounded you, you might have continued believing in a love that was never real, in loyalty that was only temporary. Sometimes pain is the only way God can open our eyes. But here is where many people get stuck. Instead of seeing the betrayal as God's way of revealing the truth, they see it as a reason to become bitter, distrusting, closed off to everyone. But that is not what God wants for you. He does not want you to stop loving, to stop trusting, to become a person ruled by fear. He simply wants you to see clearly. Ask yourself, who are you still holding on to that God has already exposed? Who has hurt you repeatedly, but you keep making excuses for? Who has shown you their true nature, but you refuse to accept it? The truth is, when people reveal who they are, believe them. Do not beg for love that is not freely given. Do not chase after people who have already shown you that they do not value you. Let their actions teach you, but do not let them harden hard heart. God does not reveal the true nature of people to destroy your faith. He reveals it to strengthen it. He wants you to trust Him more than you trust man. He wants you to stop depending on false security and start depending on His guidance, His wisdom, His discernment. Because when you start seeing people through God's eyes, you will stop being deceived by their words, and you will start discerning their hearts. And that is when you will finally walk in the wisdom and protection that God has been trying to give you all along. Pain has a way of making us question everything. When we are betrayed, abandoned, or broken by the people we love, it feels like the ground beneath us has given way, leaving us in a free fall of uncertainty. We ask, why did this happen to me? What did I do to deserve this? Where was God when I was suffering? These questions echo in the chambers of our soul, demanding answers. But what if the answer is not found in why the pain happened, but in what God is doing through it? What if the betrayal was not a setback, but a setup? What if the rejection was not meant to break you, but to build you? What if the hurt was never meant to be your end, but the beginning of something greater? One of the most powerful truths in Scripture is this: God never wastes pain. Not a single tear, not a single heartbreak, not a single moment of suffering is meaningless when placed in His hands. The very things that seemed like your greatest tragedies are often the things God will use to shape your destiny. Look at Joseph. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, thrown into prison for a crime he did not commit. If anyone had a reason to feel abandoned by God, it was him. But what Joseph could not see in the pit, what he could not understand in the prison, was that God was using every moment of pain to prepare him for something greater. He was not just a victim of betrayal, he was being positioned for purpose. What if the same is true for you? The pain they inflicted, the tears you cried, the loneliness you endured, what if these things are shaping you for something beyond what you can see right now? What if, instead of asking, why did this happen to me, you started asking God, what are you preparing me for? Because here is the truth: greatness is always preceded by suffering. Before God elevates you, He refines you. Before He trusts you with greater things, He strengthens your character. And often that process requires the pain of losing people, the pain of betrayal, the pain of walking alone. Think about David. Anointed as king, yet before he ever sat on the throne, he spent years running for his life. The very man he had served with loyalty, King Saul, became his greatest enemy. He had to hide in caves, live in exile, endure years of feeling forgotten and forsaken. But in that season of hardship, God was preparing him. He was molding him into the king he was destined to be. Could it be that God is allowing this season of pain in your life because He is shaping you for something greater? Pain has a way of stripping away what is unnecessary. It forces us to reevaluate who we are, what we believe, and where our trust truly lies. It removes the distractions, the false security, the people who were never meant to be part of our destiny. It teaches us resilience, endurance, and faith in a way that nothing else can. If you never faced hardship, would you ever discover how strong you truly are? If no one ever betrayed you, would you have learned discernment? If you were never left alone, would you have drawn closer to God the way you have now? God does not just allow suffering, He uses it. Every tear you shed is watering the soil of your future. Every heartbreak is shaping your heart for something greater. Every disappointment is teaching you to trust in Him alone. But here is the part many people miss. You have a choice. You can either allow the pain to make you bitter, or you can allow it to make you better. You can either dwell in resentment, replaying the betrayal over and over, or you can surrender it to God and trust that He is writing a greater story than you can imagine. Imagine if Joseph had chosen bitterness instead of faith. Imagine if David had given up in the wilderness. Imagine if Job had cursed God in his suffering. Their pain was real, their suffering was deep, but they refused to let it define them. Instead, they allowed it to refine them. And that is the same choice before you today. You may not see it now, but God is using this season of pain to prepare you for something you cannot yet comprehend. The relationships that fell apart, the friends who turned away, the betrayal that wounded your soul, these were not random events. They were part of a greater plan, a divine orchestration that is leading you to something far greater than what was lost. One day you will look back on this moment and understand why it had to happen this way. One day you will stand in the place that God has been preparing for you and realize that if it had not been for the pain, you never would have reached the promise. So, the question is, will you trust the process? Will you believe that what you are going through now is not in vain? Will you surrender your pain to God and allow Him to use it for your good? Because the truth is, this is not your final chapter. This is not the end of your story. This is only the preparation for something far greater than you can imagine. There is a promise woven into the fabric of divine justice. God does not just restore you. He prepares a table before you in the presence of those who hurt you. It is not simply about healing. It is not only about moving forward. It is about God lifting you up so that those who once despised you, those who betrayed you, those who counted you out, will have no choice but to witness what He does in your life. Have you ever noticed how God operates? He does not just remove you from painful situations. He does not just help you escape. Instead, He allows your story to unfold in such a way that those who thought they had defeated you must stand back and watch as He elevates you. Think of Joseph. His own brothers, driven by jealousy, threw him into a pit, sold him into slavery, and assumed they had erased him from their lives. They never expected to see him again. They never imagined that the brother they discarded like a worthless object would one day stand before them not as a slave, but as a ruler over Egypt, holding in his hands the very power to decide their fate. That is how God works. When He restores, He does not do it in secret. He does it in a way that silences every lie spoken against you. He does it in a way that forces those who wounded you to see that their betrayal did not break you, it built you. He does it in a way that turns your pain into a testimony so undeniable that even your enemies have no choice but to acknowledge His hand in your life. The same God who did it for Joseph can do it for you. The very people who mocked you, who doubted you, who thought they had crushed your spirit, God will cause them to witness your elevation. The people who rejected you, who thought they had removed you from their lives for good, will see you flourishing in the place God has prepared for you. This is not about revenge. This is not about proving a point. It is about God's justice. It is about Him showing that no weapon formed against you can prosper, that no betrayal, no rejection, no slander can stop His plan for your life. God does not just restore, He prepares a table. What is a table? A table is a place of honor, a place of abundance, a place where blessings overflow. And when God prepares it, He does not do it in private. He does it before those who need to see that their actions did not destroy you. Imagine the moment when Joseph's brothers stood before him, desperate for food, unaware that the man before them was the very one they betrayed. Imagine the shock, the fear, the realization that the one they tried to destroy had become the very person God used to save them. There will be a day when the people who walked away from you, the people who tried to diminish you, the people who spoke against you, will have no choice but to see how God has blessed you. They may never admit their wrongs. They may never apologize, but their silence, their inability to ignore your rise, will be evidence enough. But here's what's important: your heart must be right when that day comes. It is easy to let bitterness creep in. It is easy to imagine that moment and crave revenge, to hope that they feel the weight of their actions. But God does not bless you so that you can look down on others. He blesses you to reveal His glory. Joseph did not use his position to punish his brothers. He did not seek to make them suffer the way he had suffered. Instead, he recognized that what they meant for evil, God had turned for good. That even in their betrayal, God's plan was unfolding. And that is the same perspective you must have. When God blesses you, when He prepares the table, do not let your heart be filled with arrogance or pride. Let it be filled with gratitude. Let it be a testimony that God alone is the one who lifts up and brings down, that no human betrayal can override divine destiny. There are people who wrote you off, people who assumed you would never rise again, people who thought their rejection would leave you broken beyond repair. But God is not finished with your story. He is preparing something. It may not look like it now. You may still be in the pit, still walking through the valley, still feeling the weight of their betrayal. But what they do not see, what even you may struggle to see, is that God is setting the stage for your elevation. That moment will come. The day when God reveals what He has been doing behind the scenes. The day when those who hurt you will be unable to deny the favor on your life. The day when His restoration will silence every lie spoken against you. Until then, trust Him. Trust that the betrayal was not the end. Trust that the pain was not for nothing. Trust that when God lifts you up, no one will be able to bring you down. Your table is being prepared, and when it is ready, those who doubted you will have no choice but to see what God has done. There is a kind of pain that words cannot describe, a pain that lingers long after the wounds have been inflicted, a pain that seeps into the soul, making even the simplest moments feel heavy. The pain of being betrayed by those you loved, the pain of being abandoned by those you trusted, the pain of being left to carry wounds that were never your fault. But here is the truth that many struggle to believe. God does not just heal wounds, He replaces pain with a peace so profound that it surpasses all understanding. At first, this seems impossible. How can peace replace the deep ache of a broken heart? How can tranquility find its way into the shattered places of your soul? You may have spent countless nights asking God to take away the hurt, to remove the memories, to make the betrayal disappear as if it had never happened. And yet, there are days when it still weighs on you, when the past whispers reminders of what was lost, when the wounds feel as fresh as the day they were inflicted. But peace does not come from forgetting. It does not come from pretending the pain never existed. True peace comes when God takes the very thing that wounded you and transforms it into something greater. You think about a deep scar. The wound that created it was painful, but over time the body heals. The scar remains not as a reminder of pain, but as a testimony that healing took place. This is what God does with the soul. He does not simply erase what happened. Instead, He gives you the strength to look at the pain without being controlled by it. Peace is not the absence of pain, it is the presence of God in the midst of it. This is the peace that carried Joseph through years of betrayal and suffering. It is the peace that allowed David to write psalms of praise while fleeing for his life. It is the peace that sustained Job when he lost everything. And it is the peace that Jesus Himself promised when He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives." Notice that He did not say, "I will take away every hardship." He did not say, "You will never face betrayal." Instead, He promised something greater, a peace that the world cannot give. The peace of God is different from the peace of the world. The world tells you that peace comes when the storm has passed, when the pain is gone, when everything in your life is perfect. But the peace of God is different. It is a peace that exists even in the middle of the storm. A peace that settles within you even when life is not yet perfect. A peace that allows you to smile, not because the pain never existed, but because it no longer controls you. So, how does God replace pain with peace? First, He changes your perspective. When you begin to see that the suffering had a purpose, when you understand that even the betrayal was part of His divine plan, the pain loses its power. The people who hurt you no longer have control over your emotions. The memories that once haunted you no longer define you. You realize that what was meant for your destruction, God has used for your transformation. Then He fills the empty spaces. When people leave, when relationships break, when you feel as though something has been stolen from you, there is a void left behind. But God does not leave that space empty. He fills it with His presence. He replaces loss with purpose. He replaces heartbreak with healing. He removes toxic attachments and fills your life with people who truly love and value you. And finally, He teaches you how to rest in Him. There is a moment in every healing journey when you stop fighting, when you stop striving to understand everything, when you simply let go and allow God to carry you. This is where true peace is found, not in answers, not in explanations, but in surrender. Think of a child in the arms of a loving parent. The child does not understand everything. The child does not have all the answers. But the child rests simply because they trust the one holding them. This is what God wants for you. He wants you to stop carrying the weight of the pain by yourself. He wants you to stop reliving the betrayal. Stop replaying the conversations. Stop trying to make sense of what has already been surrendered into His hands. He wants you to rest in the knowledge that He is in control. You may not feel it now, but the peace of God is already working in you. The healing is already taking place. The day will come when you will wake up and realize that the burden is gone, that the pain no longer defines you, that the betrayal is no longer a wound, but a testimony of how far God has brought you. And on that day, you will understand the depth of these words. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Because the same God who saw your pain, who carried you through the storm, who walked with you in the darkness, is the same God who will give you peace beyond understanding.